In regards to the whole analytical talk, too, there was also the launch today, and hopefully this can continue to lead towards analytics and its impact on the sport and conversation. It can lead to things being a little bit more understood and fleshed out, because the NHL, finally, because this has been in the works for a bit, not the first time I'd heard about it. Some people might not have heard about it at all prior to today, but it is here. They launched NHL Edge, which you can find at edge.nhl.com, which is essentially their own sort of in-house analytical look, in affiliation, I believe, with SAP. And the gist of this is you get some more in-depth stats at the NHL level, different tracking options. For example, right on their homepage, if you scroll down for the start of this season, it'll show you who the top 10 guys are in skating speed that have hit that have the highest max speed in the league so far this season. In which case, fun fact, it's Winnipeg Jets forward Rasmus Kupari, who topped out at 23.95 miles per hour at his highest speed. It also tracks, in regards to speed, who has the most bursts, so effort, essentially, clocked in at over 22 miles an hour, and also at over 20 miles per hour. So, essentially, you could use a tool like this to say who's the fastest, who has the best acceleration, who's the most consistent in terms of having that high-end speed. You also have similar numbers for this when it comes to shot speed, shot location, zone time, where a player often finds themselves. Obviously, for shot speed, that's one that people are always intrigued in. And fun fact, right now, the skater with the highest clocked shot speed so far is Philadelphia's Travis Sanheim, who had a shot registered at 101.49 miles an hour, one of just 4 shots on the season so far registered at over 100 miles an hour, alongside Victor Hedman, Jan Ruda, and Nick Hague. And again, it has the options. You can sort it by the max speed, who has the most shots over 100 miles an hour, who has the most consistent shots at over 90 miles an hour. So not only do you get those who have hit the top, you get those who have the consistency on top of that. With the goalies, you have shot locations being tracked. High danger, mid-range, long range, and you can also sort it by how many shots against, how many saves, their save percentages on those type of shots, the goals for that they've given up, games with save percentages over 900. There's a lot of useful information here for a variety of different reasons to expand upon what's already out there from the analytical perspective, but as well in regards to video games. Because the second this site was announced to have gone live, my Twitter blew the fuck up.
Yep.
I woke up with so many goddamn notifications saying, oh my God, hey, are you excited the roster edit? Literally the last notification I have here, shout out to @Rippo_Dippo. NHL Edge probably got Tuki24 itching the roster edit. And you're right, but you're wrong at the same time. My hope is, and I believe this is the intention, but again, it comes down to execution in the future. Resources like this are going to likely be used in the EA NHL franchise in the future. At least I believe that to be the case based off of what I've heard. It's not a guarantee by any stretch of the imagination, but I do know it's something that's been discussed because, of course, it is. There isn't a single sports video game out there that is not looking at the analytical side of things and like, okay, how can we implement this into the game? Madden, FIFA, they've already done it. Heavily, might I add, for the FIFA side of things, too. They have so much tracking in their games that you can't consume all of the information if you're playing online because you don't have enough time during essentially intermission, halftime, post-game before you load into a new game. There's so much information that you can really only utilize it if you're doing like a franchise mode type of thing. There's no doubt that something like this should lead to attributes in a game like NHL 24 being more accurate. This should lead to players having proper skating speeds, proper shot powers, stuff like that. But at the same time, that will also require them to do a complete overhaul of their system, which is why I am not holding my breath at all that we will see this used when other analytics that are already out there haven't essentially been used at this stage, or even basic level stats that you can find on NHL.com, Hockey Reference, whatever, that tracks hits and block shots. Their current system, we've talked about it a million times, is outdated. It is not good enough. It results in very generic player ratings, players feeling the same. To utilize this information properly that NHL Edge provides would require them to completely change the way that attributes work, the calculation of an overall system, potentially ditching an overall system entirely.
I don't mind the overall system, but it should work much differently, and it should work more in accordance to what the player's role is, and roles would need an overhaul too. I mean, why not have 70, 75 overall guys on the fourth line, just to get the ratings right, because right now they're boosting up these stats that they may consider inconsequential, but they are very consequential. Here's an example. If you be a pro, and if you're playing the games, or even if you play franchise mode, but mostly be a pro because it's all mostly AI besides your guy, the leading hits in the league is my player, Trevor Zegras, and Troy Terry, who all play on my line. We all three of us are the top 3 in hits in the NHL. Because the gameplay is different from the sim, and they have a certain hit rating, and probably with sliders too. But also, if you look at what they, their stats and stuff like that, I always bring it back to this: Johnny Gaudreau having the same hitting stat as Alexander Ovechkin. And all these things, it's just generic stuff to boost up their overall and stuff. So they don't get yelled at for certain players being lower overall or whatever, but
that's the big issue, right? Is the idea of you're not utilizing the rating scale properly at this stage.
Yep.
The low-end fringe NHLers are rated too highly. So as a result, you are having to further boost up the star players to create that separation when that's really not necessary.
Yeah.
There is no reason, and I'll throw them under the bus because I'm looking at the Oilers roster in the video game right now. There is no reason for Sharks legend Lane Peterson to be a 75. He could easily be a 70. And then all of a sudden, you don't need to have Connor McDavid as a 97 overall with 95 defensive awareness, 83 body checking, etc. You could have those numbers be a little bit lower, less artificially boosted, less realistic, and he'll still maintain a super high rating. I've talked about it a lot because we're going back and playing through the old games, the NHL. Right now, I've gone from NHL 11 to NHL 14 is what we're on stream right now. And at the time, the rating scale was different. And I've talked about this in videos. You could have a 80 overall tough guy, essentially an elite tough guy, an elite enforcer, who would have 65s, 70s for passing and for shooting. But because it's like, okay, he's a tough guy. Important stats for tough guys are good. He has a higher rating. I don't get why we ever got away from that system. And my hope is that NHL Edge, the resource that it is, the information that it provides, not only further opens other avenues for more in-depth analytics, just in a general sense for the sport, but that it opens the door for the video game to be a better representation of the game itself and for what it should be. And that kind of goes in line with NHL 24 in general and the update that is coming out tomorrow that we learned about today and the information that came out there and talking about wanting this game to be better. We've talked about this in the past, the idea that, okay, tomorrow's update, hybrid controls are back. Different goalie controls are back. The tether system is now a toggle, essentially, whether or not you want it on or off. The problem with that is, again, they never should have had to have gone back in the first place to re-add control schemes and to change things in regards to the game. That should have just been there in the first place. Mm-hmm. And that's my concern in regards to, what the rosters could be in the future. is decisions like this, like with the control schemes, force them to take time fixing it instead of having it already be there. And now this update could have been fixing hip checks, fixing matchmaking and other things, getting franchise mode into a 5 out of 10 level. Because right now it's at about a 2 at best. That's my concern. A resource like NHL Edge has so much goddamn potential to be utilized in such a great way. But whether it be just because of lack of foresight like this, the resources, the time, the pressures of the schedule that they're under, whatever, I just don't know if we're going to see it properly implemented. And don't get me wrong, in relation to NHL 24, yeah, hybrid controls were a must, because the fact is some people couldn't play the goddamn game anymore, just due to physical capability. Some people literally need those control schemes to be in the game to be able to actually play it. The goalie controls, again, should have been optional in the first place. They are making different changes as well to the way goalies react when under fatigue. They bumped up the stick lift a little bit in this upcoming patch. Stick lift targeting has been updated to target a lower location on the opposing player's stick, which reduces the chance of taking a penalty. So the stick lift should be better.
Yeah.
Which is good. They fixed a user goalie spinning issue, which was an issue in the beta. Alongside some other things, like menu stuff for World of Chell. Creation Zone, they fixed the scrolling speed. For contracts, it's not going to be super slow anymore. They also fixed creative defensemen being listed with forward potentials and stuff like that, so that's fun. But we're still waiting for hip checks and other things like that.
Yep.
I can't talk about a service like NHL Edge and how it could be utilized in a video game sense without talking about the realities of what the video game is right now. And I just can't be confident with their current systems that it's going to be utilized properly anytime soon. Unfortunately, I just genuinely do not have the confidence or belief that it's going to be utilized properly. And it's going to take somebody or a small group of people in a dedicated position to fix this shit. It can't just be, okay, well, this guy works on franchise, be a pro, and also touches up some stuff with the rock. They need a dedicated person or a group of people to be able to put the proper amount of focus, time, effort, and care into this subject, or it's never going to be where it needs to be. That is just a fact.
Yeah.
It does not matter if it is a creator like myself, snipe and score tactics. It does not matter if they outright hire a JFresh or somebody in the analytics community to directly provide, okay, here it is. You are a resource now for what this is. There needs to be a drastic change. It cannot be the same old system that they've had for God knows how long now, because we've seen over and over again, the system does not work.
Yeah, it's not. There's nothing to say other than that. I will say, like I said before, their downfall was them grabbing the UFC license and them splitting the team up in two. That's basically the entirety of it. That's where they fucked up. That's where now, 10 years down the line, people are still saying that the game is nowhere where it used to be. And you have people going on Twitter being like, wow, it took 3 weeks to add controls to the game. And I'm like, do you remember when the IIHF put the sanctions against Russia and Belarus? And by response, EA had to remove Russia and Belarus from the game?
Yep.
And do you remember what happened for a good solid week after they removed Russia and Belarus from the game?
Somewhat. I feel like I've tried to put it out of my memory.
So anytime you would go to a Russian or Belarusian player, you would crash your game immediately. Whenever you load up their stats or anything, the game would crash. Because what they did is they pulled Russia and Belarus out of the pool entirely. Mm-hmm. And so when you're coding a game, you your game basically call the action is like, okay, I'm gonna look at this and load up this thing over here. If this thing over here doesn't work, it can be catastrophic for literally everything in the game itself. That's why when you look at other games, like for example, when we're playing emulated versions of NHL on stream using the emulator that we use, RPC S3, there is an actual change log of everything that's being loaded while you play in the background on the console. And we're playing Legacy Edition or whatever, looking at stuff like that. You can see what codes are being used, and a lot of the codes references are still saying like NHL 11, 12, 13 in the code itself. So for people to complain about the controls being out of the game, I completely understand that. And I understand why people are upset. But at the same time, it's like a piece of Jenga. You're not going to, if you grab a piece and pull it from the bottom directly, shit's going to fall apart. You have to basically rebuild the entire control system in a way to put stuff back into the game. I get people are upset, but there's a reason why it took basically a month, really, because they said initially in an update, like right after the tech test, that, hey, we're going to be adding this into the game. Because not only do you have to make sure the controls are in the game, you got to make sure they work. You got to make sure they actually work accurately, and that there isn't any other bugs happening. For example, the spinning goalie thing that happened in the game right now as we speak.
There's also a bug in Be a Pro where in Total Control where if you're using Total Control to do the between the legs deke, it nothing happens. I've tested this a few different times. There's also something on the forums where on certain, I noticed for like a PS4 user, it wasn't working on fixed camera. I'm using zone camera on the Xbox Series X and it's not working. So yeah, there's control issues right now, even with the new schemes. I've mentioned it.
Exactly. And like the major content update for, putting in the gameplay changes that with the hip checks and other stuff in there, that got pushed back because putting in the old control system was the main priority of the developers, clearly. They even said in the update there that they're pushing back all the other updates for an update in the earliest of being not next week, but the earliest of like early November. So that could be November 1st, 2nd, 3rd. It could be like the 8th of all things too.
It's one of those things where, I'll never not root for NHL 24 to be better because it's the only hockey game that's out there from a modern perspective. Just to, again, kind of bring it all together. There are great resources out there. It's just, I'm uncertain about the current infrastructure and current setup of things that, its current status probably isn't going to allow something like this to be used properly, but I hope that ends up being the case. Obviously, I'm going to push for the idea of like, hey, can we have player stats actually be representative of these players as opposed to, well, this guy's good, so give him good stuff.
Yeah.
I'd like to get away from that if we could.
Yeah.
And, again, it's one of those things. Sin, you mentioning frickin' Trevor Zegras and Troy Terry leading the league in hits in your Be a Pro alongside you. It's just like, you want that differentiation of Trevor Zegras feels like a finesse, skill-first player. But then on the same team, because the Ducks have not Eric Bolton now, they have Ross Johnston now. And if you're on the ice with Ross Johnston, you want to see that guy run around and be a bully on the ice, which is his job. Like, you want to see him get into fights. Say you take a hit. You're on the ice with Ross Johnston. Your guy takes a rough hit. You want to see Ross Johnston skate over and defend you. At the same time, that feels as likely as Zegras or Troy Terry going and defending you at the moment.
Yeah, Troy Terry has 100 penalty minutes because he fights in the game. He has a fighting rating. I don't know what it is, but if most of the time he's the only one on the ice, so I get crushed or Zegras gets crushed, or Zegras crushes someone wants to step up, but Zegras has a never fighting. Troy Terry maybe has rarely, but he's the only one out there to step up. He always fills in the place. So yeah, Troy Terry has 10 plus fights in that. Like that's the other thing. It's that their gameplay, the sliders are not representative of hockey, and you can no longer choose between real-time sim, competitive or arcade anymore. I noticed that's gone. That's not an option in Via Pro. I don't know if it's an option anywhere else.
But I mentioned that. It's just NHL 24 and it's stupid.
Yeah.
It is stupid.
I miss that because now I have to go in depth with the sliders and fuck around a lot. Whereas last year I was just, you know what, my guy has 95 speed now. Why am I struggling to blow by Eric Goodbranson? Because it's set to real sim or something. And then if I set it to competitive, all of a sudden my skating stats fucking matter. Yeah. And then Eric Goodbranson can't keep up with me. But now I have to go bit by bit and figure it out. But also, I'm going to say it for the millionth time, there needs to be separate tuner sets for separate game modes. Like, we can't have HUT dictating fucking everything. And that's what it is right now. Everything is tuned for HUT. Maybe a little bit for eShul, but it's mostly tuned for HUT.
Yeah. I can't disagree with that. For the record, I had to look it up. Troy Terry in the most recent NHL 24 roster update has his fighting, of course, which you have the option of never, rarely, sometimes, and often. It is currently set to rarely. His fighting skill is currently set. Any guesses of Troy Terry's fighting skill in NHL 24? 80. Endo, do you have a guess?
No, I don't. I'm not familiar with Troy Terry, unfortunately.
His fighting skill is set to a 70. Troy Terry has one career fight. In which
you know why he's at rarely? Because he's a two-way. EA does not fucking figure out what, like, every time you get deep in a franchise mode, because I always check fights and hits, I consider those the fun stats when I'm doing the stat wrap up. Every time you get deep into it, the top leaders in fighting, they're all two-way forwards and two-way defensemen. Because I feel like because the way EA randomizes the AI generated players, it's anywhere in the spectrum. Like, you're not going to see a sniper come in with often fighting, but if they're a two-way, EA doesn't know what the fuck to do. So I think they just have it. Okay, they can be anywhere. So you end up with these like two-way defensemen and two-way forwards who might be in the high 80s and 90s, and they're fighting 20 plus times a year because EA doesn't know what to do with a two-way and setting their fighting.
For the record, that lone fight of Troy Terry's was against Jay Beagle in April of 2022. Hockeyfights.com allows its users to vote on the result, either win, lose, or draw, or, who won, or was it a draw? 91% said Jay Beagle won that fight. But Troy Terry has more fights than Arbor Jackeye does in your Via Pro, essentially.
Because he's the only one who isn't set to never, so I guess he'll just always step up, even though it's set to rarely.
Maybe someday it'll be good, everybody.